So I think we'll get started. Again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ethan Lassiter. I am a urban planner with the Department of Planning and Development on the West Region team, part of the newer regions breakout within the team. Today we are discussing this request for proposals for Roosevelt and Kostner in the North Lawndale community in the West Region. Again, very briefly, I'm just giving some opening remarks, and then I will walk through the RFP that is available on the city's website that I'm quite sure many of you have downloaded. But really, this is intended to be a kind of larger Q&A where we have representatives and staff from different parts of the city able to answer any questions that you may have. To that effect, there is a Q&A feature and Q&A box within Zoom. So please, as I'm presenting and then as we're answering questions, please feel free to add additional questions there. And small questions can be answered in real time by city staff. Larger questions or anything a bit more nuanced, I will discuss after the initial presentation. And with that, we can get started. So at a very high level, the city of Chicago is attempting to kind of revamp how we approach requests for proposals. This has most recently been implemented via the Invest Southwest initiative and the kind of implementation of that initiative. So RFPs, traditionally, yes, solicit development proposals for city-owned land. The goal of Invest Southwest RFPs, of this RFP, and really all documents moving forward is that, yes, we have kind of a basic project details, but we go above and beyond to demonstrate kind of the desired urbanism or use of the site, a more robust understanding of the description of the uses for that site that are desired by the community. So that community are kind of more involved in the front end in shaping this document. And then that we have a better understanding of the incentives that the city can coordinate for a project like this. These were implemented starting in August. There were 3 initial RFPs released in Austin, Inglewood, and Auburn Gresham. The goal being that these become a template for other regions for really all other types of RFPs and development projects that we do. The Roosevelt and Kostner site is really the first example of using that template for creating this document that is not directly tied to an Invest Southwest corridor, but is still within an Invest Southwest community and is advancing larger city goals for how we engage and vision our development processes in the future. Obviously, this is a site that's been vacant for a few decades. Alderman Michael Scott Jr., and the Department of Planning and Development have received numerous proposals for this site, including many during COVID, so over the summer into the fall earlier this year. But the goal was really to use this RFP process to create a competitive and transparent process that helps advance the major goals of the city and the community. With that being stated, all the details of the RFP are stated in the document. However, I want to highlight that the RFP has 2 main larger goals. They are job and wealth creation and being a good neighbor, as we will discuss. First off, job and wealth creation is very much intended that the selected developer moves well beyond what is required by city ordinance called 26 and 6 for minority and women-owned business requirements. As stated in the selection criteria, there's a desire for actual local hiring and ownership strategy. And again, the first biggest number will be how many jobs are being created at this site. Of special interest, in italics, to the community was how many jobs are accessible for the hard to employ, maybe returning citizens, ex-offenders, and definitely how many of those jobs are locally based. You'll note in the map on the right, in light blue is shown the cities, really. West Region, in darker blue, is the North Lawndale community area. And then overlaid on top of that in a red hatch are West Side zip codes that were included in the RFP criteria as a potential way of framing what does local hiring look like. A earlier project the alderman had worked on suggested if you hire from those zip codes, that's looked upon more favorably in this review criteria. So we have tried to adapt that to this document as well. That's one example of how you could focus on local hiring, but other strategies are certainly welcomed. Along with a number of jobs, obviously, is wages that are accessible, wages that are living wages or supportive of the community. And again, that there's opportunity for advancement and training beyond just simply having a job, that someone in theory could move from a more kind of labor position to a skilled labor position into management and even perhaps ownership opportunities. And again, this hiring and ownership strategy does ask for a creating local wealth building opportunities. Suggestions include employee ownership models, co-op models, business partnerships or partnerships with local community development organizations. However, it is open to whatever is desired or most feasible. The second element of this is being a good neighbor. As a long vacant site, suddenly having more activity here is largely an opportunity, but does bring it with it some challenges. So largely related to the first point, we do intend there to be meaningful local involvement on the site, not just through this RFP process, but long-term. So again, partnerships with local organizations or local businesses are reviewed well. And then again, if the development team, the tenants or businesses occupying the spaces or business partners reflect the local community or involve the local community, again, that is looked upon favorably. But largely, being a good neighbor is about addressing the existing environmental conditions of the site, and that considering we are activating a site, dealing with noise, perhaps truck and traffic concerns, really in service to promoting a high quality built environment. So again, another element of the selection criteria in the RFP document does state this commitment to design excellence. And design excellence, as I'll touch on in a couple slides, is a priority for DPD and the city and the DPD Commissioner, Maurice Cox. So given that, I'll walk through this development concept we created for this RFP document to show some idea of a vision for the site. It is not a binding decision about exactly what will be built here. The idea is simply to frame some of these suggestions and recommendations we have for the property, but there's certainly room for flexibility and for implementation based on market feasibility, design considerations, whatever else is desired by a respondent. So again, just noting we are discussing this site called Roosevelt and Kostner, but bound by Roosevelt to the south, Fifth Avenue to the north, between Kostner and Kildare Avenues, and then bisected by the CSX Altenhelm line, by a CSX rail line. So we've created a development concept in partnership with architects from IIT to highlight a couple recommendations and suggestions we have for the site. The first are some site plan recommendations. Recommendations essentially being a bit more strict in that these are things we certainly recommend people try to do. I'll walk through some of these very briefly, but are glad to answer questions about them afterwards. An idealized proposal would have parking that is fairly internal to the site, located away from the street and screened by any proposed buildings as much as possible. Down here, minimizing curb cuts. Again, the goal is essentially that 2 curb cuts are better than 12 curb cuts. We know there's logistical and physical constraints on that, but that we can, as much as possible, prioritize the pedestrian travel path, pedestrian experience, and minimize congestion. Again, minimize queuing and idling of truck traffic or freight vehicles. As shown in this diagram, the idea is that this would be a longer kind of drive aisle for freight vehicles to enter towards a back parking area that again kind of follows parking recommendations, with the goal being that we're eliminating queuing in the public way. And finally, building setbacks from the street, allowing industrial buildings to be mindful of their context, where possible, preserve street walls, but make sure that those setbacks or kind of landscape buffers were applicable. help transition between industrial and non-industrial uses. At a slightly more aspirational level, I suppose we'll say, there are urban design suggestions. These are supposed to be a bit more flexible, and they're suggestions we have for design that may advance some best practices, but I think there are solutions that we aren't showing that one could definitely propose for these options. So first off, noting that in redeveloping this site, we're obviously highly focused on job creation because it's in a planned manufacturing district, very much assuming a lot of that will come from industrial job growth. To the extent that there's kind of retail or office uses or nonprofit office space or something like that, the idea being that kind of more active uses or amenities that the community might interact with more can or should be focused on Roosevelt Road. That area has certainly a commercial corridor legacy, but also hopefully more of a future going forward, and certainly would be more important to activate as a street than perhaps Fifth Avenue or Kostner. On the bottom right, we've highlighted creating spaces for multiple users. This could take a lot of different forms, but essentially what we are trying to suggest is that multiple sizes of buildings or multi-tenant buildings can be helpful to support a variety of businesses. That maybe some user needs, yes, 200,000 square feet, but a couple other need 2,000 or 5,000 or 20,000 square feet. Smaller spaces can certainly increase the participation of local entrepreneurs or small businesses who may have less capital, but may certainly be important members for economic revitalization in this area. Obviously, kind of flexibility with changing market conditions is also provided by multi-tenant or flexible spaces. I'll jump up to this upper left where we talk about the transition between an industrial use and the surrounding residential neighborhood. This is, again, an industrial site in an industrial corridor. However, it is on the eastern edge of that corridor, surrounded to the north, east, and south by a more residential character and community. So, where possible and to the extent feasible, we do encourage perhaps landscaping, fencing, smaller buildings that are a bit more contextual to kind of frame or border the area. And then finally, we'll touch on the idea of creating open space near this potential greenway. As it's stated in this call out, the city and community are actually in the beginning process of determining the feasibility of a rails with trails greenway along this unused CSX Altenheim rail corridor. As a major potential green space and community amenity, the site should create, reserve, or preserve open space near that line. It doesn't necessarily need to be built out and programmed at this point. That's certainly of flexibility, but I think the city, we need this awareness that building right up to the line will be a bit of a challenge for any proposal that we get. And again, as shown in the RFP document, there are a number of existing buildings and plans that do advance a lot of similar criteria as what we're looking for here. Both Testa Produce and the Method Soap Factory within Chicago are newer industrial buildings that advance a lot of the elements just highlighted. Again, this Brush Park plan done by Util for Detroit is in a fairly similar context. And again, I'll highlight this image shown was created for an entirely separate plan last year, but follows a lot of these similar suggestions and recommendations we are going for in this RFP process. That truck traffic and parking can be kept a bit internal to the site. There's kind of an active frontage as much as possible on a commercial corridor, and that it does acknowledge that pedestrians may exist through the site and exist in the surrounding community, which we get is a challenging condition for larger industrial sites. Given that the goal is achieving design excellence, the city has coordinated and invested significant resources to achieve this. One element of that is our partnership with the Chicago Architecture Center to release this pre-qualified list of design service firms. The goal, again, being that it reflects both established and emerging firms that reflect the diversity of the city of Chicago, firms that are uniquely positioned to play an important role. This is certainly just a suggestion. You don't have to use a firm from this list, but if you are looking for architectural service or design, these are certainly people that we know are of a certain quality and standard. Similar to that, the city is advancing design excellence principles. There's a 10-point document that has been released and is available on our website, in addition to neighborhood design guidelines. So very briefly, and this can be a larger conversation as needed with city staff and per Q&A, but the RFP does highlight a number of possible financial incentives that can be used, Class 6B, and then Class 7 as feasible, given the commercial build out shown. Certainly NOF or TIF may be a possibility, and then less locally controlled, but new market tax credits and potentially opportunity zone funding as well. And then very briefly, as mentioned in highlighting these two primary goals, but then also shown in the selection criteria section of the RFP document, at a very high level, the RFP is advancing this first promotion of short and long-term community wealth building. Again, I think that the short-term idea is a bit do more than 26 and 6 for who is building the project. Long-term is a bit how is their ideas of ownership, equity stakes, local involvement in the project in the long term. And obviously, this is an RFP. Professional and technical competence and economic feasibility of the project is extremely important. There's a more nuanced discussion about how can we build more inclusive economic development for racial and ethnic minorities? How can we get developers and developments that look like the communities they are building in? And then finally acknowledging that this is the start of a process, that the RFP was released in late September, that there's kind of this time period of 3 months to solicit responses from the development community, including obviously this pre-bid conference, that the RFP will be due December 24th. From that, the intention is that the city will shortlist responses, essentially at a high level, just filter out for economic feasibility and viability of the project as a whole. But then the intention is that selected developers do present publicly to the community, and that Q&A and interface is done with community feedback before the winner is chosen by the city. We expect that'll happen after the new year with kind of RDA or a selected developer advancing into 2021. That was our relatively brief overview of the RFP process. From that, glad to start taking questions and comments. You'll notice this is a webinar feature, so I think as respondents, you are limited to the Q&A box, but if needed to flesh out a question more, we can unmute you. But from that, I'll jump into these Q&A questions that I'm seeing on screen now. First is, how flexible is the city with the program square footages that were outlined in the RFP? Again, I hope this helped highlight a little bit. This was simply kind of a vision for the site, but there is a lot of flexibility. The square footage programs were suggestive, but in no way should be considered a firm number. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. Second, what is the objection to having parking accessible from the street? Well, the idea is certainly that you access parking via the public right-of-way. I think a concern in urban design practices is that we are advancing as much as possible, kind of a better built form or less suburban vision for this part of Chicago. And so a lot of the internal parking ideas was simply that, having parking be internal to the site, that you have people interface more with landscape and trees and buildings more than you have people look over surface parking lots. In the wealth building goal, are there parameters around who will accumulate the wealth? I'm wondering about how the site will help build wealth for the community through the investment beyond jobs. Again, the community wealth building section does have quite a few elements to it, and does suggest some other kind of co-ops or models to use. We are not being prescriptive in telling exactly what someone needs to do. Again, there's a little bit of flexibility of hiring and ownership strategies that advance wealth will be, all else equal, prioritized compared to a similar submission that does not do that. There's a lot of forms that can take, however. How do I go about getting on the, how do I go about getting on the approved list of design firms? I'm not sure if Gerardo Garcia is here to answer a bit more detail about how that list was created or process was created, but that list was published, or that document was published. The intention being that that serves as a resource for developers in the community to look to going forward. But it's, at this moment, I don't believe looking for new additions.
Yeah, hey Ethan, and thanks for the question. So yeah, the list was put together and curated in partnership with the Chicago Architecture Center, and finalized by an independent jury. At this time, I don't know that there is an upcoming call for proposals or qualifications for the list. But if you'd like to send us your contact information when that does happen, we can certainly include you in that call.
Thanks, Gerardo. Another question. What was the community feedback regarding putting housing on the site? I'm glad to take this, Gerardo, as well, if you want to chime in. Housing was certainly just suggested, and actually I'll go back to the document. We presented kind of a live work idea or smaller concept, again, really as a way of just getting multi-tenant or smaller businesses into the space. But again, it's a bit more just suggestive than a requirement. We're certainly not saying you have to have housing on the site, and we expect a lot of proposals will not include housing on the site at all. That's certainly not an expectation. It was simply creating an idea if there was any desire.
And if I could just add a little bit more to that, I think the takeaway for folks on the call is the idea of supporting, finding ways for this site to support small and locally owned businesses, right? And so maybe they don't need a large logistics center, but maybe it's a smaller shop type of setup. So the live aspect of that was just, a proposition.
How many developers do you see presenting to the community before selecting a winner? And how heavily will you weigh community feedback into the selection process versus feasibility of project economics? Gerardo or Chris, certainly feel free to add on to this. At a very high level, I believe our shortlisting is mostly, in a sense, calling for feasibility of project economics. So we want to suggest to the community everything that is being presented to you now, we believe has a certain threshold of feasibility that the city could achieve with whatever incentive package we can align with this and whatever the developer is putting into it. So the feasibility, in a sense, I believe would already be covered to an extent in what is presented to the community. And then Chris or Gerardo, if you have more to add about kind of the community feedback going into the RFP selection process.
I think you covered it, Ethan.
Okay, that works. Will the city be willing to subsidize with TIF? And if so, how much will be available in this TIF after the budget declares a surplus? So one part of that is a slightly more detailed question about TIF surpluses and where that money goes. But will the city be willing to subsidize with TIF? Short answer is yes. It'll depend on exactly what is proposed. Again, it has to be needed for a project. We're not giving away money just for the sake of giving away money, but demonstrating that there's a need and a given financial gap, which we do understand the economics of this site. But given that gap, yeah, we would anticipate TIF being involved with a project like this. Noting, however, that TIF doesn't pay for ground up new construction. There's certainly, site prep and environmental costs and other elements that can be applied to this, but TIF will not make a huge portion of a development budget. We don't expect. Next question, what is the cost of the environmental cleanup? AIS is on this call from the city, kind of the environmental team is on the call. I don't know if they have a dollar figure per se, but do have more environmental detail. Sarah or Ram, if you, I don't know, perhaps give a high level of kind of the environmental condition or any kind of environmental cost estimates that you've seen.
Yeah, I can handle this. This is Sarah Rubin with AIS. Basically, both portions of the site have remedial action plans, just generic remedial action plans that have been approved by the Illinois EPA site remediation program. Those remedial action plans basically say that the site, in order to be remediated, only needs engineered barriers at this point. We did go to TIF, and we're going to be receiving some money to take out some underground storage tanks that we have found at the site. And so that should be done before the site is ready to be developed. But basically the engineered barriers that we are envisioning are going to be the building footprint would be an engineered barrier. So any kind of concrete foundations, the asphalt parking would also be considered an engineered barrier, and then also the landscaping. So the building foundations and the asphalt parking are basically part of the redevelopment, and so we don't consider those to be actual environmental costs. We consider those to be part of the development costs. There is going to be an additional cost to the landscaping just because this is in the SRP. We're going to be requiring that all of the landscaping be excavated 18 inches, a geotextile put down that was in the remedial action plans. I think it's been approved already. And then the site built back up 18 inches of clean fill that would meet taco specifications. So basically that can be CA6 and then probably 6 inches or soil on top of that for the growing medium. And then the soil would need to meet taco specifications. So you would need to have clean soil. So that's going to be a little bit more expensive than just regular soil that you might find anyplace else. So basically and then we're going to require to go through the site remediation program. As I said, we've already got approved remedial action plans. Probably the developer will want to take those generic remedial action plans that just say we're going to put an engineered barrier and actually specify what those different engineered barriers are. Again, those engineered barriers are going to be where the buildings are, where the parking is, and where the landscaping is. And then the only other document besides that would be the remedial action completion report, which basically says, we told you we were going to put engineered barriers over the top of it, and we have put the engineered barriers, and this is what the engineered barriers look like. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, but I can answer those later if there's a way of looking to see if there's more questions about that now.
I thank you for that. Yeah, I'll look for them. Okay, there's a slightly more specific. The engineered barrier of landscaping would require subsurface of 3 feet. Last time I worked with the site, or with the state, sorry, with the state. Where does the 18 inches come from? So 18 versus 3 inch or 3 feet differences.
Right. So it used to be that the IEPA required 3 feet, but recently they have been approving just an 18-inch barrier as long as you put a geotextile down. And they have specifications of how thick that geotextile has to be. But definitely the 18 inches has been approved across the city. I can't remember off the top of my head if this one says 3 feet or 18 inches, but certainly when the environmental consultant comes on board to put the new remedial action plan of the new engineered barriers, you can just change that from the 3 feet to the 18 inches if it still says 3 feet.
Thank you. There's a comment, where can we find, or where can we find copies of the remedial action plans for site remediation? Sarah, you've sent me those environmental documents. As note to everyone on the call, our intention is to add those to the RFP addenda that's already on the website. So you will receive a new email, a notification when we update the RFP addenda. That update is intended to add the environmental report documents we've received since releasing the RFP. There's one other question, I believe. The comments on extracted soil and clean fill applies only to landscape areas, correct? Maybe for Sarah.
Yeah. Basically, because the types of engineered barriers that were anticipated are going to be asphalt, concrete, or soil. And so as I was saying, the asphalt would be like your parking areas. The concrete would be the building foundations, or if you do parking in concrete or anything else in concrete. I mean, you can also do landscape pavers, things like that. But yeah, the only thing that's going to require the 18 inches is going to be the landscape areas. Everything else will just be built normally.
Thank you for that. It's the only specific questions I've seen at
Well,
this moment.
I can see this one from Christopher Egan.
Yep.
The RFP acknowledges the land will need environmental remediation. Given the size of the RFP, that will likely be a significant expense. Does the city plan to support bids with this specific expense? I hope that I've addressed that comment already. But yeah, basically what we're anticipating as the quote unquote remediation is just to build the project. So it would be the buildings, the parking, the landscaping, stormwater. I keep forgetting to mention the stormwater. And Gerardo, you said I saw a note that you wanted to pipe in about the site.
No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to clear the question from the queue.
There you go. Okay.
All right, thank you for that. And noting that we will update the RFP addenda with additional environmental documents, that you should all receive that notification or email shortly. Another comment, or back at the top of the list, is what do you mean by 3 massing alternatives? That is shown, 3 massing alternatives is in the RFP document, in the kind of selection requirements of or what to submit. Massing alternatives are simply suggested as a way to show you've thought about how you're trying to arrange your program on your site and different possibilities. They don't have to be advanced or detailed, really, but simply the idea that you've thought about how you're arranging everything on your site, and so that in a city's kind of internal design review process, we can get a sense of which one of those, you believe both best advances what you're trying to do, but we can also kind of review that you've thought about different alternatives. I know, Gerardo, you have more to add to that.
Yeah, and I'll just say, the image on the screen is essentially more or less a massing alternative, right? This is one approach to how you might distribute program on the site in a very schematic way. And so that we're essentially looking for respondents to show us how they thought through the variations. And I think the submission criteria also talks about, or requirements also talk about, identifying a selected, a preferred alternative. So if you've done 3, and you're saying, I've gone through this process and this is the one that I think works for my proposal, we'd like to understand that.
Thank you. Next question, I'll probably direct to Chris, but is the city looking for a sale of the land, a land lease, or an ongoing ownership? Are they looking to maximize the land value or provide maximum benefit to the community? My initial answer, but Chris, please feel free to add on. I believe the city is kind of most looking at just the sale of the land. Perhaps if there's a more nuanced model that someone wants to propose, we'd be open to that. And again, I think it's more about maximizing the benefit to the city and the community. Certainly the land value or the sale price is an element of that, but there's a lot of other goals and ideals that are trying to be advanced at the site by the community, by the aldermen, by neighborhood groups, and by the city. And we know that all of those may not maximize the sale price of the land. So it's a component, but definitely not the whole of how we would make that decision. Chris, I don't know if there's any more details.
Hi, yeah, this is Chris Jane from Department of Planning and Development. I think Ethan has it correct. And if you look at the page 22 of the RFP document, it talks about the target price, and we didn't list the target price for a specific reason that Ethan just mentioned. And I think we have listed some of the things that we would actually consider above and beyond the price of the land. Obviously, we would like to maximize the land value as well, but I think what's more important are those 3 points that we are seeking and as a more of an objective for this RFP.
Thanks, Chris. Next question. Is a project involving open space and community service, e.g. a community center, not being pursued at this point? Again, the RFP is a vision or suggestion of what to see at the site, and we are certainly open to other possibilities. We say that open space is being suggested, kind of landscape and how to coordinate, hopefully, a greenway literally cutting through the site in a kind of longer term future is envisioned as a community amenity. When getting to kind of a community service or community center use, what the biggest goal we heard over and over from community stakeholders and from the aldermen is that this is about getting jobs in the community for community residents. To the extent that someone wants to include a community service or community center use in that space, that is certainly welcome, given that it balances, or if it can balance kind of job creation as a goal as well. And there are certainly amenities that highly align with this, like job training is both in a sense a community service as well as a kind of workforce use. Does the city have any specific commercial development on Roosevelt in mind? Office space, gas station? Short answer is no. There's been a little bit of kind of market study work or other proposals that have included some commercial on Roosevelt. The idea simply being that if there is any kind of non-industrial use suggested on this site, our initial suggestion is that it goes along Roosevelt. That being said, we're not saying that the city wants to or needs to see a gas station or 20,000 square feet of retail, along Roosevelt. It's flexible. Sarah, I don't know, I think I saw your pop up on this, but I'll read it out. Was there discussion or interest in other city services provided on site as part of the overall development, such as Chicago Park District building or recreation space, schools, or other city service buildings? Gerardo, you can add more detail if I'm not aware of it fully, but the short answer is no. Again, the message we've most heard from the aldermen in the community has been, we need more jobs on this site. And there's certainly a place for, again, community amenities or other kind of city services as well, but that's not the main goal we've heard repeatedly about this site. If something is suggested, again, there's flexibility in that, but that's not a driving theme we've heard at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, really, services that we've heard are a priority are, the content that Ethan outlined at the beginning of the presentation, in terms of workforce development and job training, and having those, finding ways to be creative in your proposal to provide those opportunities on the site. Certainly not much in terms of city services.
Another question, there have been a few proposed projects mentioned in the media for this community. That is true. How does DPD ensure that the public knows that this process seeking proposals is organic and legit? That's kind of the nature of doing all of this RFP work, that again, this RFP, or what is envisioned here, was shaped much more early and much more proactively with community stakeholders, with the aldermen going into that process. And again, the nature of the RFP was that the aldermen had been receiving, at this point, dozens of proposals. And rather than come to the community, a month, whatever, 6 months from now saying, this is what I've chosen, it's a much more public and transparent and competitive process. The goal being that in a clear competitive process, the kind of cream rises to the top, that we will get a better project when everyone is aware of what's going on with this site, rather than a kind of internal city negotiation. Okay, this would be a question for the next couple, maybe for Sarah. Please clarify your comments on stormwater. The following question is, may we use underground stormwater retention? So 2 stormwater elements.
That basically, I was just trying to remind people that on a site as big as this, that there are going to be city stormwater requirements. Absolutely, we can use underground stormwater retention. And a lot of the landscaped areas can be incorporated into your stormwater plan. That was just basically my intention with mentioning the stormwater. Keep it in mind. A lot of those stormwater can be used as the engineered barrier. I mentioned the permeable pavers. There are just different things that you can do that would be qualified as engineered barriers that you could use as your stormwater plan.
Thank you. The next will actually also be for you. Other than environmental, what is the subsurface condition of the site? Is there substantial demolished building foundations, heavy industrial foundations, etc.? What info is available?
Ethan, do you have copies? I do believe that there are some geotechnical reports on this site, and I apologize that I did not review those in preparing for the meeting. I'm looking on the drive now, and
no, I would say so. So yes, I've seen some of the reports, but I don't have the detail. We can review our files and get we'll write out an answer to this. Just also noting that this whole pre-bid conference is being recorded. The Q&A will be transcribed, and any answers that we can't fully answer right now, we will get an answer and post that onto the same RFP website. So Sarah and I, we can go back and get the best information from that, if that's best. You don't need to look up files right now to get an answer.
I'm finding at least one geotechnical from 1999, and I do believe that the last developer that we were in negotiations with, I think they had done a geotechnical, but I don't remember seeing that report.
Okay, so we will coordinate and make sure whatever is added to the new or updated addenda includes any environmental information asked, and then we'll get a Q&A answer that best answers this question. Next, can the city provide a bit more context around the Rails with Trails concept with timing and some guidance on sizing / barrier to proposed vertical development? Yeah, so again, this is at quite early stages, but very briefly, I'll highlight that The idea being that we have this Roosevelt and Kostner RFP site bisected by this unused rail corridor. The possibility being that could we do a rail, initially we pitched that kind of rails to trails in talking with the railroad, given actually the width of the area up there, but as well as their desire to maintain some ownership of that, it'd be more likely or more feasible as a rails with trails project. Given that we're kind of exploring it from almost Cicero to Rockwell on the east, through what's shown on this dotted green line that cuts through the northern portion of North Lawndale. And again, it's simply by publicizing that or mentioning that we want to highlight the goal of keeping some kind of space around the rail corridor open or accessible, or the potential to become a green space. We don't have specific, you need to maintain 10 feet of distance or 40 feet of distance from the rail. That's not the level of prescription that we're at right now, but we hope and think publicizing that will at least hopefully bring proposals that are aware of it and reflect that they ideally need to interact with this a little bit. Gerardo, I don't know if there's more to add to that, but that's not an issue.
I think you covered it.
Okay. Is there commitment to reopen the Kostner Blue Line station? So that would be north of this site. That's short answer is that's just simply been not within DPD's what we've looked at so far in this area. But I do see that it's a closer Blue Line exit or station than what currently exists. So we can advance that conversation with CDOT, but at this time, I don't think DPD is aware of any CTA plans to reopen that. Another question, are there any small business retail requirements? Again, requirements, no, but all else being equal, a proposal that creates more space for kind of small business or local entrepreneurs or local retail would be viewed more favorably than something that doesn't. So it will be a weighing of a lot of different kind of interesting goals for the site, but no, there are no firm requirements. Again, it's a lot of kind of suggestions of how do you best advance job creation, wealth creation, and being a good neighbor. And small business can do a lot of elements of that. So all else, it is a valuable addition, but it's not a requirement. Will you share the geotechnical reports? Yes, we will coordinate and get anything that needs to be added to the addenda posted on the RFP addenda. That is, I believe, every question we've seen thus far at this moment. It'll take a little bit of time, but barring that and barring any other questions, again, please feel free to reach out to DPD or myself as the contact listed in the RFP document for any additional questions, and noting that we will post all of these questions in a Q&A document with written responses on the Invest Southwest website. And then if anyone emails us or calls us with any new questions, we will update the Q&A with additional questions as they come in. So any question asked to the city will be put in that public document, I suppose is the way. There's another question. Any specific reasons this site has been vacant for the last almost 50 years? There's a lot of site background on this. I don't know if it's tough to answer decades in a little bit, but I don't know if Sarah, if you have more background on this or have more detail to add.
No. Well, yes and no. I mean, I'm not a planner, but the site was already vacant. I don't know if everyone is aware of the history of this site, but it was part of the Silver Shovel You guys can Google that if you're not familiar with what that was. But the site was vacant before Silver Shovel. The city came in and cleaned up all of the Silver Shovel construction debris that had been dumped on the site. I think it's just, again, I'm not a planner. I think it's just a very large site, and it's difficult to develop large sites.
Yeah, I would agree. I will note again, related to obviously Invest Southwest or the city and the mayor's initiatives, a lot of even this RFP process is intended that all the kind of city departments are a lot more coordinated and a lot more proactive early on in getting this site moving. That's again been part of the kind of community engagement process and RFP process, but also that we have different parts of the city in coordination earlier on in the process, that hopefully we don't hit roadblocks that have occurred over the last decades. So glad to sit out for a little bit if any other random question pops up, but I don't see any other question in the Q&A. Just last couple of remarks. Obviously, as stated in the RFP document, it is due December 24th, expecting to select kind of a short list or finalist that will then present to the community in the new year, pretty early in the new year. So please work on those. Definitely get in touch with DPD if we can in any way help you facilitate getting partners into your proposal, if that's your desired group, or any way that DPD can be of use to you. Please get in touch. dpd@cityofchicago.org, as well as contacts listed in the RFP document. Given that, I want to thank everyone for their time. Don't see any additional questions. This this recorded meeting will be posted, and this Q&A will also be posted on the city's website. With that, I want to thank everyone for their time and have a good afternoon. Thank you.